the 12-tone row, I think, continued as something he used throughout his life in contrapuntal ways that often some reviewers did not get, because there were a number of things that people would think might have been a parody of a Baroque trio, for instance, that actually was a 12-tone row. And he just took great glee at manipulating things. And I think that that's probably what attracted him to Varese. I mean, there is a connection, because I know he studied Dalla Piccolo when he was at Juilliard. And Dalla Piccolo obviously had a connection to Varese. So I would almost think that that was sort of the connecting thing. I mean, he often said, when people said, well, it doesn't sound like contemporary music, and they said, well, the only thing you're listening to is John Cage, you don't know music.
Chris, you were saying about what 12-tone row, what 12-tone technology meant to, technique meant to Brian.
It was one of his toys.
Okay.
When he wanted to, he used it to prove to people who didn't think he was modern enough to show that, yes, it was there, and that it didn't have to sound like they all thought it had to sound.
Yeah, that's like Brian.
And he did that all the time.
Now,
and I mean, it was woven with his use of counterpoint. So if you weren't paying attention to the counterpoint, you might miss it entirely.
I want to talk about my various first experiences with Brian, which involved you, Bill Cowdery. Please unmute yourself. I don't know if you remember, you must remember, in Risley, where I came in September of '72, and we did a Candide together. We also did a musical dessert for Carol Husa, and Brian was involved in that. I played a short elegy, a short piece of Carol's, and Brian played a longer piece, it was a sonata, and you, Bill, and I played his 8 Czech duets. Remember that?
Sure, very well.
And then we played them again in your hometown in Ashtabula years later.
Yeah,
wonderful experience, and Brian really took on the heavy labor of that longer piece. He was quite amazing. Brian was really something. In January of 1973, the world premiere of my violin concerto took place at Risley College, and Dan is the third violinist to have played that now. Janet Packard was the first. She came down from Boston to play it, and on that program was a piano quintet that Brian had written for his friend Laurie Schulman at that time, and Laurie and Brian and my first wife Karen Campbell. By the way, Karen's 70th birthday would have been on the day that this is going to be broadcast. There's going to be what not podcast, what do we say, Zoom, so the 5 of us were there talking, and in the program note, Daniel, I had said that my piece used the highest natural note written for the violin, and Brian countered by in his program note by saying that his piece used the highest natural note written for woodblock. I remember that was his way of countering that. But we went out to dinner, the 5 of us, after the concert, and I remember we were talking about Berg and Mendelssohn and the concerto and so on, and Brian turned to Karen and said, "You think the Yankees have a chance this year?" I mean, he had a way of being irreverent just naturally. In April of '73, Brian was a TA, a teaching assistant to a course that I took as a graduate student and that Karen took as an undergraduate. It was in Russian music and Chopin, taught jointly by William Austin and George Gibeon, both of whom were on my committee. It was a marvelous course, and as my graduate student project, I did a translation of Mussorgsky's Ženitba, the getting married, or the marriage, and did a Reader's Theater presentation of it with George Gibeon and William Austin and Laurel Fay and Jared Amaldev all taking parts. Brian was the only TA that didn't have a part in it. And I think he kind of resented that. And he said, you know, if you do another opera, I'd like to be in it. And guess what? In December of '73, I finished Idiots First. It was a 4-year project of Mark Blitzstein. And I have it right here. In August of '74, we did Idiots First. And the pawnbroker was played by Brian Israel. There he is. You can see him with Paul Gibbons and Bill Castleman. This appeared in the Ithaca Journal. I just found this from August of '74.
Excuse me, which is he in that picture? We can't read the caption online.
Oh, okay. You can see Brian is the pawnbroker over here.
Is he facing us, or is he got his?
He's facing you. Yeah, that's Brian is facing you. Glasses has his back to you, and Bill Castleman is at the other side. But there's Brian negotiating with Mendel, played by Paul Gibbons, and he's trying to pawn a watch, and he says $8, and Mendel says, I must have 35, and the pawnbroker says, so go see Rothschild. You know, that was Brian's favorite line in the opera. So now let's talk about Brian though as a singer. I mean, he had been in the Met Children's Chorus, isn't that true, Chris? You're muted. Unmute. Thanks.
That is true. It happened after his Little League accident, where his fingers wound up giving him that unique reach in more than an octave, and it was a way of keeping him off the streets. And he did it, I believe, for only 2 seasons, and he ended his career singing the Shepherd Boy in Tosca, and he figured, what else could he do before his voice changed? Yep.
Oh my goodness, the Shepherd Boy in Tosca. You're not Tannhäuser.
No, Shepherd Boy in Tosca.
There was a Shepherd Boy.
It's in the
Kathleen Battle made her.
The last. Yes, Chris was saying it's in the last act, and it's a beautiful solo.
Oh, right.
It depends on the production with the silhouette or picture of Rome's rooftops. Last time I saw the show.
Thank you, Mrs. Bronx Opera. We appreciate that knowledge there. I studied Tosca at Indiana, but I don't remember that part. Thank you. Well, that's great. So he was in the choir for 2 years then.
I believe so, yeah. And I know he did Bohème and part of the Carmen, Tosca, obviously.
And among his works is an opera called Portia, based on a portion of Merchant of Venice. Is that right?
Yes. It was written for my studio opera at Indiana University, with the usual things that Indiana University opera department makes you do with double casting, and the fact that there always are more women than there are men. And so Bassanio was a trouser rule. Yeah.
When was that done in Indiana?
It was done in Indiana.
When?
Probably April of '77.
So that was the year after I left, because I was my opera was done in Indiana in March of '76. And then I went back to Cornell. So we just ships passing in the night on that. Is there a recording of that? Is there a video?
There is not a video, because that was before the days of actually doing it, but there actually is a recording of it. It's held at Indiana University. The best quality one would be at Indiana University in their library, because it was my piece. Or
that was the semester I graduated.
Did you direct it or sing in it, or both?
I directed it.
Did you sing or dance to other music of Moran's?
I did, you know, I sang in his comical canons. I sang in Burma Shuma. And he wrote some hymn-like things for Calvary Episcopal Church. He had a commission from Ithaca College for a symphony. It was from a musical fraternity. They wanted a symphony with organ. He had never played organ before, so he thought he best figured this out. And so in doing that, he encountered the church choir and the need for altos to have very important musical lines rather than a 3-note range.
Okay. So some of his works are at Cornell. Bill Cowdery has been helping to make them available, and some of them you say are at Indiana. Is that correct?
Well, the tape recording would be. I'm sure obtaining a portion of the scores are at Indiana University or at
Cornell.
I discovered when I moved back to Syracuse that I do have some reels of real, back in the day of reel-to-reel tapes. But I know that mine were only copies of the tape that resides at IU's Jacobs Library.
So was this Taking a Portia, was that the only opera that he wrote?
No, he also wrote a Winnie the Pooh, which now actually probably could be performed because the Milne has run out of copyright. It was performed. It was performed something about a bear or something in order to avoid the problem, but his father did the libretto, and it has the more typical things that you might assume with Winnie the Pooh and honey and balloons and Piglet and Eeyore.
How large a cast is it?
I want to say about 6.
Uh-huh. And is that available at Indiana or Cornell?
I imagine that's in the Cornell collection because that was in the 80s.
Bill,
Maybe.
We have Portia for sure. I don't remember seeing a Winnie the Pooh, but I certainly haven't dug through everything.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing.
Would that have been a very young work?
No. It was while I was one of the stage directors and managing partner and managing director. And it was frustrating.
And explore that further. I have a couple of other questions I wanted to ask you, particularly about the pieces that we just did. Has anyone besides Brian himself ever played the piano part in the Varese Elegy or the 4 piano pieces?
No.
I mean, presumably he did perform them at some point.
Oh yeah, I'm sure he did. And there might indeed be some programs from Lehman College.
Uh-huh.
I would assume that much like other universities, they require their students to perform and have recitals, particularly if you're going to graduate them as a composer.
Well, that's possible to look it up then. But Joel Mandelbaum has an expression, after there's a premiere, the next performance is called a deuxième. So that's what we're doing is a deuxième of these Brian Israel pieces, right? Now, in the conversation that I had with you last year, you mentioned, or in the notes that you gave for the concert at the Musicians Club of New York, that Brian wrote 6 symphonies, and the 6th one sounded particularly interesting because it was on text by Langston Hughes. Do you remember what texts they were and who performed them? And is there a recording available?
There is a recording. It will take some tracking down because it was recorded by WCNY in 1989. I believe Gregory Shepard was the bass baritone. Donna Miller may have been the soprano.
Oh, I remember her.
And the poems, because I haven't, the score and that is at Cornell, so I haven't seen it since I went to divinity school, had God to a Hungry Child, Personal by Hughes. And I thought the third one was The City, but it doesn't seem to be under that title. But it speaks about caverns of stone and things like that. And I can't, and the Bible portions it's based upon are the Beatitudes from Matthew 5 on Psalm 16.